Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome, everyone. My name is Ko-Shen Su. I'm a faculty member from this department. It is my great pleasure to preside over this fourth Chen绍-hsing Memorial Lecture. As many of you have known that Professor Chen绍-hsing is not only one of the founding member of this department, but he is also the first sociologist who earned a PhD degree in sociology in Taiwan. But probably not too many people know that Professor Chen绍-hsing also went to Princeton and studied demography over there, and then come back and laid a good foundation for the development of demography in Taiwan. So today is a very, very special occasion that after maybe from last century till now, that we continue this wonderful legacy from Professor Chen. And I especially like, on behalf of the department, I would like to thank the Professor Chen's family for their generous support for this lecture, and also another alumni, Mr. Huang Zai-tian. Their generous support allow us to invite distinguished scholars from all over the world to share their research with us. So on behalf of the department, thank you, and please continue to support our department. Okay, everybody agree that demographic challenge, a change in East Asia has become a pressing challenge in this region, including Taiwan. Many of us believe that addressing this challenge require both rigorous empirical research and thoughtful theoretical debate. Today, we are truly honored to welcome one of the leading scholars in this field, Professor James Raymo, with us. Professor James Raymo is a leading scholar, is a professor of sociology and Henry Wendt III 55 Professor of East Asia Study at Princeton University. He also served as director of the Office of Population Research, founding director of the Global Japan Lab, and faculty directors of the strategic partnership between Princeton University and University of Tokyo. Professor Raymo is leading social demographer whose research focus on demographic change, especially low fertility and population aging in Japan and East Asia. His work has addressed a wide range of topics, including marriage, fertility, family change, social inequality, aging, and health. In addition to his extensive scholar contribution, he currently serves as a co-director of research on East Asian demography and inequality, and served as vice president of Population Association of America in 2023. I'm sure we will learn a great deal from about the latest development in demography from his talk today, Family and Inequality, Diverging Destination in East Asia. Please join me in warmly welcome Professor James Raymo.
Okay, thank you for that very nice introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's especially an honor to be able to speak on my research at the Chen绍-hsing Memorial Lecture. And I hope that my conversation, my sharing of my work on demography in East Asia, primarily Japan, is of interest to the Chen and Wang families, who I hope are able to listen and hear some work that is part of the legacy of Professor Chen. I am, as Professor Su said, at Princeton, where we all know of the legacy of some of his instructors, like Ansley Cole and people like that, the Frank Notstein, right? The founder, the originator of the demographic transition ideas. So I'm hopefully carrying on a little bit of that tradition today. It's especially a big pleasure for me to be here, and I have to say this has been one of the warmest welcomes I've received anywhere where I've had an opportunity to visit. So thank you all. Not only have I had a good chance to meet with the faculty, talk about research, share ideas, but last night had a wonderful meeting with several of the students who I realized almost all of them have a connection with my former home, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I see one of our current Princeton students sitting in the middle here. So I feel a real connection with everybody here. I haven't been to Taiwan for whatever reason, I've told my colleagues here, for a long time. So it's been just a real treat to be able to come back and reestablish connections and hopefully develop some lasting connections with people here. So thank you for being so welcoming. I'll get started with just a little bit of background about what I want to talk about. Professor Su appropriately mentioned the kinds of things that policymakers, scholars, regular people, the media are particularly concerned about with respect to demography in East Asia. Low fertility, number one. Population aging, number two. Population decline, number three. We had a great talk about these issues yesterday with the graduate students, at least great from my perspective. I hope it was from yours as well. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I'm more than happy to talk about that if people are interested in the question and answer session. But what I want to talk about today is something a little bit different. It has to do with the same demographic changes that underlie low fertility, which of course underlies population aging and decline. But I don't want to talk about them for their own sakes, but I want to talk about them with respect to how they may be related to or not related to trends in social and economic inequality. A couple of things I want to say about the title and the content. First, it says Diverging Destinies, which I'll define later, in East Asia. That's what I really want to talk about, but my own limitations will mean that I'll talk mostly about Japan. But what I hope is that we can use this opportunity to think about some of the similarities that you're familiar with here or elsewhere with the Japanese case. Think about some of the differences. Think about what we can learn from those similarities and those differences. Because one of the things that I really firmly believe, obviously, unlike many of you in the room, I'm an outsider studying East Asia. And that's not the reason why I believe this, but I think it's maybe related to this. I think that often in our field, at least research on Japan or other East Asian countries in the US tends to be thought of as kind of it's a distinct place. It's just different. And of course it's different, but that's not really what I care about. I care about understanding the ways in which we can understand what's happening in Japan or East Asia more broadly in the context of broad theoretical frameworks that are interesting, relevant, salient to people who are working in the US, people who are working in Europe and elsewhere. If they're salient in the US, there's salience in thinking about them here as well. And this is the kind of work that I really try to invest in myself, try to convey the importance of to my students and so on. So that's really the goal today. If we can walk away from here today with the sense that, oh, I want to study that in Taiwan, then I feel like it's been a success from my perspective. I'm really going to talk more about a research agenda than about a particular research paper. I talked about a particular research paper a couple of days ago at Academia Sinica, and I can see 1, 2, 3 people who were there, and there's going to be a lot of repetition for you three, so I'm sorry. Not complete repetition, but a little bit, so please bear with me on that. So having said that, let me jump in. And I realize probably that the norms here are just to let me talk for 45 minutes and then have Q&A. But if you have questions, clarification or otherwise, please feel free to stop me. I'm more than happy to take questions as we go. Let's see. Okay, so I know that most of you can't read this. That's okay. You can guess from the kanji what most of these are. And this is just a slide to demonstrate two things. One is, how did I become interested in studying the intersection of demography and inequality in Japan in particular? And who cares? Both are answered by this slide. These are just a small sample of the general audience books you can find if you go into a big bookstore in Japan. All of them are about some aspect of family and inequality. Husband and wife in inequality society, that's a bad translation. Educational inequality. The economics of childhood inequality, just to give you a few ideas. The poverty among women, intergenerational transmission of poverty within families. These are the kind of things that, I see this in front of me. I can't escape it when I go look at this area of the bookstore in Japan. I know this is something that's really important. There's almost a whole quasi-academic industry focused on understanding perceptions of and the reality of growing inequality in Japan. And I think that there's a similar sense of growing inequality in some other parts of East Asia, or not. And I think thinking about that contextual set of differences is really important. So clearly, people care about this, and this is sort of how I came to this. What I want to do today is to introduce this notion of diverging destinies, which some of you are deeply familiar with, and for some, this may be the first time you've heard this expression. It's also related to Princeton, because the person associated with this was a former Princeton professor. I want to say a few more words about the relevance of extending these ideas to the East Asian context, Japan in particular. A brief summary of existing work. What do we know about the link between family change, family demographic change, and inequality in Japan? I want to then go through a series of highlights makes it sound too good. A summary of some of the work that I've done that is closely related to these questions about the intersection of family change and inequality, and hopefully in the process can convey to you, even if you have no interest in it yourself, the value of thinking about this as a research agenda in Taiwan or in East Asia more generally. So that's where I want to go. Let me just sit. This is a paper over here on the right by Professor Sarah McClanahan, who many of you, the family scholars in the room, will know. She is the high queen of family sociology and family demography. I think she unfortunately passed away too early a few years ago, but her legacy is a powerful one, and a lot of it emerged. A lot of her earlier work culminated in this paper, and then this subsequently inspired a lot of other people. You can see by the huge number of citations in 20 years. That's a lot of citations for a demography paper. And I'm gonna describe this in a minute, but this is where this comes from, the 2004 presidential address. And I don't know how, there's a lot of young scholars in the room, and maybe you haven't had this experience yet, but the professors, the associate professors, I hope you've had this experience where you're at a conference and you hear the presidential address and you just go, wow, I want to do that. That's how I felt when I heard Sarah McClanahan's talk in 2004. This was maybe that I was a fourth-year assistant professor at the time, and just thought, this is it. You'll know why I've spent so much time on this since then. This is a follow-up book that I'm going to refer to a bit later, but this is where this comes from. And the basic idea, again, you guys have seen this, but for the others who haven't seen this, this is just a stylized representation of her, the logic of diverging destinies. There's no real data. I just made this up. I just plotted this. But the key points are, we have the prevalence of some outcome, some family outcome. For the sake of argument here, let's call it divorce, okay? It's an outcome. This outcome, whatever it is, for example, divorce, is something that we know either theoretically or empirically is related to children's resources, children's well-being, children's outcomes. That's the key. That's where the diverging destinies, the destinies is children's lives. And we have that on the vertical. On the horizontal, we have some measure of calendar time. 0 can be anything. It's in the past, okay? And what we have here are measures of the prevalence of that experience, divorce, for low SES, middle SES, and high SES families, often mothers. Doesn't have to be mothers, but often it's mothers, okay? Demographers often get a lot of criticism for focusing too much of our research on mothers and women and not enough on men. That's a fair criticism. The conversation at Academia Sinica the other day, somebody asked a very good question: where are the men? I think I had an okay answer, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this can be the SES of the family, the father, the mother, doesn't really matter, but it's often the mother. So what we have here is at some point in the past, the prevalence of divorce. Divorce wasn't common. It's a relatively rare event, and there's no socioeconomic gradient. You can see, they're all about 5%, okay? But what happens over time is that divorce increases for everybody as it becomes more acceptable, more common. This can be cohabitation, could be non-marital childbearing. I'll give you a whole list in a minute. But the point is that the increase is more pronounced for bad outcomes, divorce, non-marital childbearing, for those in the lower SES group. So you get this divergence. That's the diverging part of Diverging Destinies. You get a divergence in family behaviors that we know to be associated with children's resources. And this contributes to a growing divergence in children's outcomes. This is where the family inequality link comes from in this framework. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but this comes from the really distinctive US case. I think that those of you who I've talked to a little bit, or you've heard me give talks before, will know I have a strong opinion about the US as a comparison case. I think it's a horrible comparison case for a whole bunch of reasons. However, it doesn't mean that I don't think there's value in taking seriously and carefully evaluating theoretical frameworks, theoretical expectations that are derived from that distinctive US context, family context. So this is the basic idea. She calls these scissor graphs. You know, you have this divergence. If this is something good, like stable maternal employment, something we think is associated with more resources for kids, then this would be the high SES group. The high SES is progressively doing better than the low SES. So that's the basic idea. These are the outcomes I mentioned. Early versus late marriage. You're going to see a lot of these in the Japanese case. I'm going to show you results from empirical analyses on not all, but most of these. Cohabitation versus marriage, to the extent that we think cohabiting unions are less stable, less good for children. This is one area where I think we know that East Asia differs quite a bit from Europe and the English-speaking countries. Stable versus unstable marriage, divorce, assortative mating. There's a lot of interest in the increasing tendency in the United States for the highly educated or high earners to marry each other, leaving the low educated, low earners to marry each other. Early childbearing versus late childbearing. We've done work on this in Japan. Unpartnered versus partnered, single parenthood. Unintended versus intended childbearing, to the extent that we think that intended births are associated with better outcomes for children in the long run. Single versus partnered motherhood, and stable labor force participation. So these are just the sort of specific family behaviors. And note that all of these are things we know have been changing. And these are things that we know have been changing, and we think or know have been changing in ways that are systematically associated with mothers' socioeconomic circumstances. Yeah. So anyways, the Diverging Destinies, how does McClanahan explain this? She has a few things. Feminism, the growth of feminism in the United States, and the ways in which it systematically has benefited women at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum. My own belief is that this is probably less true, not untrue, but less true in Japan or the East Asian context. Birth control, the emergence of effective birth control techniques that let women take control of their reproductive lives. This is another one that I think is not so relevant in Japan, at least, where the contraceptive environment is very, very distinct in having almost no use of modern contraceptive technology. Labor market changes, this is hugely important, and I'll talk more about this later in the Japanese context. This is what I talked about the other day. Policy shifts, welfare policy is thought to incentivize different family behaviors among those with more resources and those with fewer resources. The classic example in the US is single mothers lose money, welfare money, or public transfer money if they have a partner in the house with them, a father figure in the house with them. So why do I like this? I like it because it's compelling. It's compelling in one particular setting, but note that, I didn't tell you this, but note that in McClanahan's work, she explicitly links this to this notion of the second demographic transition, which many of you may be familiar with. The importance of this is that the second demographic transition framework is thought to be universal. It happens at different speeds, it happens in different ways, but it happens everywhere in wealthy countries. And this is the same, by extension, of her view of diverging destinies. This is based on the US data, based on the US experience, but it's something that she posits and tries to provide empirical data to show has spread around the wealthy world. So if I, as a scholar interested in family and demography in Japan, don't at least pay some attention to this, I feel like I haven't done my job. So I really want to be engaged with this. So the basic idea is, what can we learn from this? I'm sorry, there's a spelling error right here, apologies. But I think there's value simply in applying this to other countries, but I think that that's the starting point. I think that the real thing that we want to do is to apply this to a place like Japan or a place like Taiwan with a deep understanding of that contextual environment and how it differs from the United States in ways that may shape the processes that are central to this link between family change and growing inequality, and derive from those contextual differences and insights a better understanding, or a more nuanced understanding, a fuller understanding of the ways in which these links play out differently depending on the context. And I think as social scientists, that's our job, is to understand the ways in which context matters. We often get criticized for, oh, here's another paper from Japan just blindly applying an American theoretical framework to Japanese data. Can't they do something better? I want to do something better. I want to try to be able to evaluate and think about what these frameworks mean and don't mean in a different context. And I think, again, as I repeat myself, I think that's our job as social scientists. So I've been trying to do this. This is a book on Japan, a little book, that's an exaggeration. It's a pamphlet. It's like a working paper with a really nice cover that I wrote with a colleague, Miho Iwasawa, several years ago, trying to replicate some of the ideas that McClanahan put forth in her papers in using Japanese data. And this is an effort with my colleague, Hanjun Park, who is a demographer and sociologist at University of Pennsylvania, who is, I think, the leading expert on family change in Korea, family change and inequality in Korea, and Jia Yu, who is a professor at Peking University, and I consider her to be the #1 demographer in China today. She's great, and it was a real pleasure to work with the three of them. You may ask, where's Taiwan in this? So Jia did all of the work pulling together the data from Taiwan as well. So, if we do an update, I hope one of you in the room will be part of that effort. What do we know about diverging destinies in East Asia? It's not like people haven't studied family and inequality. There are tons of papers that evaluate socioeconomic differences in that list of family outcomes that I pointed out earlier. There's a little bit of research on socioeconomic differences in children's outcomes. I'll show you some of our contributions to that literature later. Some research on family behavior, so divorce and children's outcomes. So for example, we know from this research that Japan has one of the highest child poverty rates in the OECD for single mother families. It's extreme. Over 50% of single mothers and their children are below the poverty level, the relative poverty level in Japan, which is, I mean, that's higher than the United States. So that says something. But little attention to broad theoretical frameworks. I've done all the Google searches. I think most of the references to diverging destinies in Japan are either papers I wrote or papers that my colleagues or students have written. And that's, not to say I'm doing good things. It's to say that I think people aren't paying enough attention more broadly to these ideas. A lot of reasons to think that diverging destinies probably not so relevant in East Asia. One is high degrees of gender inequality. Remember, feminism was the first sort of explanation. And I think Taiwan is a bit of an outlier in East Asia. Japan is a bit of an outlier in the other direction in East Asia in terms of gender inequality. But I think to the extent that we believe that to be part of the story, emerging opportunities for women in the public sphere, so to speak, being differentially available to those at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum than at the lower end. I don't think that that's such a big focus. A history of homogeneous life course. There are wonderful papers written back in the 70s and 80s that basically show socioeconomic variation in family outcomes in Japan is very limited. I remember, I'm sorry to digress a little bit, but I think anecdotes are helpful and interesting. I remember as a young graduate student, your guys' age or career stage, and I read a book on fertility change in Japan. I thought it was great, really interesting, very careful empirical work. And then I read a book review of that later. And the book review was really harsh. It said they spent 250 pages describing no relationship. So, basically the idea was, there really is no SES difference in fertility. I'm going to show you that that is really not the case in Japan anymore. There's a lot of evidence consistent with this notion of diverging destinies in Japan. But there are strong reasons to expect diverging destinies to be of great relevance. I mentioned the welfare policy. One of the issues I think that's really important is a lack of a strong public safety net, social safety net. Japan and other parts of East Asia are often referred to as sort of the East Asian welfare state or the familistic welfare state or something like that, with an emphasis on the role of the family. I don't really buy that so much. I think Japan is a pretty normal country right now with respect to government spending on family policies. But nonetheless, I think that those at the bottom are disadvantaged in Japan as they are elsewhere. The other thing that I think is really important is a rapidly changing labor market. I'm going to even repeat my side commentary that I shared the other day. Often I present this in Europe, I present this in the United States, and I sort of have to explain to the audience that Japan doesn't have, broad lifetime employment like it used to have. Oh, really? But I think you guys know that that's not the case. The labor market in Japan and other parts of East Asia, Korea is a great example, have changed dramatically over the past 20 or 30 years with the emergence of non-standard employment, low paying, low security, low benefit types of jobs. And I think thinking about the distribution of exposure to those kinds of jobs is important for this broader framework. Let's see. Okay. Data. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to the data after I have a sip of water. So I did try, this is from that paper, the review paper with Park and Yu that I told you about. These are trends in a simple measure of divorce. This is just the percent of women who report being divorced at ages 25 to 39. So it's not a great measure of divorce, but it's a measure we have and we can compare. This is Taiwan. No, this is Japan, sorry, this is Japan. I'll show you Taiwan next. This is the percent divorced among university graduates. This is the percent divorced among high school or less. Look familiar? This is exactly the scissor graph kind of thing. There's a little bit of change here, but exactly what McClanahan sort of suggested is happening in the US. So divorce for sure is something that I'll show you some more very recent data, better data on divorce later on. Here's Taiwan. Same thing. University graduates, high school graduates, high school or less. Same thing, maybe even more extreme. You even have a decline in divorce among the highly educated women. So these are both empirically, on the surface, consistent with this idea of diverging destinies, to the extent that divorce is associated with a reduction in resources, systematic difference in resources for children, and by extension, children's outcomes. To repeat myself for the nth time, attention to this is important. If we care about sources, levels of, sources of, and potential responses to growing inequality as a policy issue. Yeah, my view. Here's, I've thrown in, I've thrown in Korea here, highly educated, less educated. China's a little different. This is China, low educated, high educated, not a lot of, not so consistent in China, but for sure, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all look very similar with respect to the differentials, growing differentials in divorce. Here's what I could find. There's more. There's many, many more studies on diverging destinies in East Asia, but here's one on premarital pregnancy in China. Yue Qian is a really excellent demographer, the University of British Columbia. I think she's maybe moving. Unmarried mothers in Hong Kong. Here's another one. This is Hanjun Park, again, my colleague. Childcare time by parental education. That's not a family demographic behavior per se, but it's a resource in South Korea, showing a growing gap in highly educated parents and less educated parents. And here's one I found for Taiwan about what I just showed you, growing educational differences. I don't know her, but I look forward to meeting and discussing her work. Yeah. So let's get into some more data. One of the things that I think is also important for me to describe to my American audiences, and I'm not lumping you guys together, I just want to be complete here, is that Japan is not a low inequality country. It's a normal, a relatively high inequality country with respect to economic inequality. These are OECD averages. The OECD averages right here. Obviously, South Africa is not an OECD country, but it has very high income inequality. This is China right here. Recent research by my colleague Yuxia at Princeton and his colleagues at Harvard, your advisor, have demonstrated extremely high measures, your advisor, yeah, very high measures of inequality in China. Japan and Korea fall here, somewhat higher than the OECD average, but about the same. I looked up Taiwan, it's about here, a little more than Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong even a little higher. So East Asian societies, East Asian countries are not low inequality countries overall. That doesn't mean that the family changes are relevant for inequality, but it means that these aren't low inequality countries. This is the relative poverty rate. I couldn't find measures for the other non-OECD countries, but the poverty rate in Korea for single-parent households is about the same as the OECD. China and Japan are way up here. These aren't, the US, I spoke wrong. The US is higher. It varies year to year, but Japan is always among the highest in terms of the relative poverty rate of single-parent households. Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit of my research. I want to pay attention to time. We started at about, so that's about 30 minutes. Okay, great. I want to share some work that we've done on differences in marriage, divorce, single mother's well-being, early childbearing, bridal pregnancy, that's marrying after getting pregnant. I don't know, a good trivia point I think I mentioned yesterday in our conversation, about 1/5 of all marriages in Japan are preceded by pregnancy now. So to the extent that we think that that's less planned and maybe maybe reflective of less stable partnership or less planned family formation with implications for children. This is something we care a lot about. Maternal employment stability, I talked about that the other day here. And as an outcome, we've done a lot of work on children's cognitive and non-cognitive well-being. This is done with colleagues at the University of Tokyo, Keio University. This is where most of my colleagues work. You can read the kanji. It's the Government Institute for Demographic Research in Japan. And one of my former students at Wisconsin is now at Hong Kong Polytech, and she's been a co-author on almost all of these with me. So this is from that Diverging Destinies little, I told you it was the working paper with the fancy cover. We did a lot of these in there for all of the outcomes we have data for. And this is the predicted probability of the first birth being preceded by, the first marriage being preceded by pregnancy, or alternative, actually better than that, the first birth being conceived prior to marriage. That's what the measure is, yeah. And you can see a real increase among those in the lowest group. This is not a great comparison group. This is a really select group in Japan, very, very small. But here are the high school graduates and two-year college graduates. Here are vocational school graduates, my mistake, vocational school graduates. Here are the university graduates and junior college graduates. Looks to me pretty much like what McClanahan has in mind when she's thinking about family bifurcation. So this is just one outcome that we see being consistent with that set of expectations. Here's another one. I don't know if any of you are interested in or have done research on cohabitation. So we're interested in cohabitation for a variety of reasons. One is that this is something that conventionally is thought to be uncommon in Japan and East Asia. Okay, and it's also something that we've done work on earlier, or demonstrating that it's not so uncommon, but it's different in that it's not an alternative to marriage, but it's a precursor to marriage. Many of these are short-term unions that transition into marriage. So we're interested in it for that reason. We're interested in it because we think that these may be less stable unions, they may be more common among less educated men and women, with implications for well-being. And the third is something we demonstrated in an earlier paper. These types of unions are often associated with pregnancy, not childbearing, but pregnancy that leads to marriage, which is then followed by the birth. So again, I'm going back to the previous slide, to the extent that these premarital pregnancies are associated with less favorable outcomes, both for the parents and for the children, this is an avenue we care about. And this is a very descriptive paper. It came out in Demographic Research a couple years ago. And basically what we have is the low education, middle education, high education group, and we've broken down the pathway to first marriage. These are all married women, all married women. This is just the conventional path. You marry. You meet someone, you get engaged, you marry. This is people who live together with their future spouse before marriage. This is people who live together with their future spouse before marriage and get pregnant prior to marriage with that future spouse, okay? And this is the group that doesn't cohabit with their future spouse, but gets pregnant and then gets married to sort of legitimate, if you want to say, that pregnancy and birth. And what we can see here is, A, cohabitation is not uncommon in Japan. We come up, overall, I think it's about 35% of all first marriages are preceded by at least, I don't know, a few months cohabitation, often longer than that. But we can also see that cohabitation, the two solid orange, 28% here, 28% here, 32% here, is a little higher here. Bridal pregnancy, being pregnant, 19%, 12, and 8%. So it's over twice as high for this group as it is for the highly educated group. So again, to the extent that these things are related to children's outcomes, this is again consistent with this idea of diverging destinies. And you guys may be thinking, okay, that's interesting. He's showing us, how these behaviors differ, but what about the real meat? What about the kids' outcomes? I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute, but the point I guess I want to stress is that's a thing that we haven't had enough time and enough good data to work with. And I said at the outset, I'm trying to share an agenda and hopefully convince some of you guys that this would be a really interesting and valuable line of research to pursue if you're interested. Hang on. This is a paper from a paper that will hopefully come out later this year or probably early next year in demography. And what it is it's a descriptive update of a paper we published about 20 years ago on the levels of divorce in Japan, and most importantly for this talk, educational differences in divorce in Japan. So basically what these are are marriage cohorts, the marriage year, so going all the way back to the 1980s. This is before I married, so this is a while ago, up to about 15 years ago or so. And what we can see here, if this doesn't look exactly like the McClanahan slide I showed you at the beginning, I'm going to have to fix it to make it look better. To me, this looks exactly like that. You've got almost no difference here. Divorce is really low, and you see everybody's increasing. University graduates in green, increasing more slowly. Two-year graduates a little higher, but still increasing at a pretty slow rate. And then you have high school graduates, all the way up to 30% by 10 years. After 10 years of marriage, 30% of women in the lower educational group, high school and less, that's about a little under half of the Japanese population for these marriage cohorts, are divorced. And we know from other data that about 60% of these divorces involve kids. So again, by inference, this is critically important for thinking about children's resources, inequality, and the reproduction of inequality, especially if we go back and look at those OECD data showing the high levels of poverty among single-parent families, especially single-mother families. I don't know the situation about custody in Taiwan. In Japan, still now, 80% of all divorces involving children result in sole custody for the mother. Sole custody. There's a new law was just passed last month, but there's that. Here's another one. This is from a paper that's in progress right now. I'll show you a little bit more on that in a minute with respect to outcomes. But these are low-educated, vocational, kind of like low-educated, junior college and university. And these are self-reported employment trajectories of mothers of young children, okay? And the options are continuous employment with the same employer, so stable employment. Continuous employment with a different employer, which often means maybe a step down in the work hours, a step down in pay, a step down in responsibility. Re-entry, temporary exit, coming back when your kid is in preschool or something like that. And temporary exit, which is an even shorter exit. And what you can see here, if we think that continuous employment with the same employer is something that's associated with longer run, better economic outcomes, that is, I don't actually have the number here, about 4 times as high. It's low for everybody. Note that it's low for everybody. This is female labor, this is maternal labor force participation in Japan. Stable employment is low for everybody. It's increasing, but it's low. And we see, though, that it's about 4 times higher for university graduates. If we think about all continuous employment, for the highly educated, it's about 10 percentage points higher than for the less educated, okay? So again, this isn't trends, this is just cross-section, but it's consistent with this pattern. Here's something from that same paper. So what we did was to come up with 4 measures of economic disadvantage, okay? Low income, below the median equivalized household income. Inability to save, people who can't save or who are spending down savings. economic need, so subjective economic, this is not subjective. This is not able to buy necessary food or clothing, a sort of conventional measure for need. And this is subjective difficulty. My economic situation is very difficult. And you can see these are coefficients from linear probability models. The reference group is high school graduates, the lowest educational group. These are all negative, all statistically significant, which means that every group relative to the least educated group has significantly less disadvantage with respect to these. And you'll notice that it's almost linear. There's a clear gradient in economic disadvantage among, these are all mothers reporting this, mothers, okay? All mothers. And what we want to know is how much of this difference can be accounted for by differences in divorce and unstable employment. So we proceed to account for those factors, and we get this. So we see that the red are from the models that include divorce and unstable employment. And you can see they're about 30% lower. So these diverging Destinies behaviors account for about 30% of the gap in these various measures of economic well-being. And remember, these are all families with kids, okay? So again, this is consistent. But I would say, you know, I don't want you to keep, I don't want you to think, okay, you know, he went through all of these things and made a case that, you know, Japan looks just like the United States. I don't want to say that. I want to say the patterns are similar. The magnitude is different. The magnitude is different, okay? So I want to be careful on that point. But that's part of the contextual variation that I think is important to keep in mind as we proceed. Here's a little bit more about outcomes, children's outcomes. The other ones have been kind of family outcomes or maternal outcomes. Here is a paper that came out in the Chinese Journal of Sociology a few years ago, again with my colleague at HK Polytechnic. These are math scores, Japanese scores, and reasoning scores, logic, sort of logic tests. So these are the same data that you guys saw the other day. And what you can see here are the standardized scores for children whose family income is in the bottom quartile, the middle 50%, and the top quartile. Yeah, and zero is definitionally the mean. These are standardized, so zero is definitionally the mean. These are significantly different from zero. These are not. Okay, I mean, so the middle is the middle. But those who are in the, parents who have income in the lower quartile or in the higher quartile are systematically and statistically different from those in the middle 50% with respect to their children's cognitive performance. This is consistent with the general pattern. And what we want to do is to try to understand the extent to which these patterns don't reflect income only, but reflect the kind of family behaviors that we think are associated with income that I've just shown you are associated with educational attainment. So this is part of the agenda. We're not there, but hopefully you guys will, some of you and some of others will join the effort to better understand these relationships. Here's another, same data, same three groups, low, middle, high, and children's behavioral problems. There's a big index in this survey, a standard international index of behavioral problems. And you can see, again, a really clear gradient that favors those children in families with higher levels of income. This should come as no surprise. I don't bet on anything. I'm not a gambler, but I would be willing to bet that it looks like this in Taiwan too. It looks like this pretty much everywhere, I think. But documenting it is important. You know, I was saying earlier, you know, maybe sometimes demography looks boring because it's very descriptive. But I think if somebody doesn't document this, it's speculation. And it's our job to clearly document this and to clearly understand what underlies this. Here's where we get a little bit closer to what I'm talking about with respect to linking family behavior to the differential outcomes that I just showed you. So this is from another paper in progress where we're looking at early childbearing. And why this is really interesting to me, I may be going too far here. Tell me when to stop, somebody, okay? I want to have a conversation with you all. But one of the things that I think is really important here is that a lot of the research on family behavior and inequality in the US that focuses on early childbearing really, at least until recently, focused on teen childbearing, like really early childbearing. Teenage childbearing almost doesn't exist in Japan. I'm guessing it probably doesn't exist much either in Taiwan. And that raises the question, you know, is it teenage childbearing? Is it childbearing, you know, before a level of maturity or economic security or educational completion? Or is it relatively early? Does it have something to do with normative structure, something to do with the selection processes of people in different marriage age regimes, if you want to think about it in that term, that has implications for children's well-being? So what we've done is to look at high school, junior college, university, and we have three groups. These are people who marry, I think it's in the first 15% of the age at first marriage distribution, age at first childbearing distribution. And these are people in the middle, the middle 2/3, and this is obviously, it's like the top quarter. But what we have here is early childbearing is not common, but 17% of mothers with a high school degree had their child early, as we define early in the Japanese case. That's 4 times higher than for these guys, twice as high as these guys. And then what we do is to proceed to see whether or not there's a relationship between early childbearing, or timing of childbearing, and children's test scores. This is their math score. For children who are born to younger mothers, it's 38 points below the mean, 0. Statistically different. Average, nothing. Older is actually significantly better. This is a puzzle to us. We want to try to figure out what it is about older marriage, which is about 32, 33 in the way we've divided the data up in Japan. So anyways, this is another one that we have been working on. I'm going to skip this in the interest of getting through and talking to you all more about your own views of what I'm doing and what might be relevant next steps. But so what do we make of all of this? I think that the data that we've brought to the table, whether it's descriptive data, whether it's careful empirical analytical analyses, suggests that this notion of diverging destinies may help us to understand high levels of income inequality, high levels of relative poverty. And there's also this shared sense of declining opportunity in Japan. I didn't have good data on this, and I don't know whether this is more broadly visible across East Asia. Korea, yes, for sure. Maybe even more extreme than Japan. A subjective sense among younger people that I'm not going to do as well as my parents. Sounds like the U.S. a little bit, doesn't it? That's part of the background. And a lot of this has paid attention to wage stagnation, 30 years of wage stagnation in Japan, growth in non-standard employment. We can talk more about that. Population aging, we can talk more about that. But what we really want to bring to the table is this focus on family and family behavior that systematically differs with respect to parents' socioeconomic status, to repeat myself. So in comparative perspective, I think I've showed a few things. One is that East Asia is a little bit higher than average among wealthy countries with respect to income inequality. But there are some aspects of family behavior that are likely to minimize inequality in East Asia. Very low non-marital childbearing. I didn't talk about this. Japan, it's 2. Korea, it's 2. Somebody told me yesterday in Taiwan, it's 4. This compares to 40% in the US. European high levels is a little bit different because it doesn't mean the same thing, but the US is an outlier on that. A good comparison is a place like Italy, where non-marital childbearing was essentially the same as Japan 30 years ago. And now about a quarter or more of all births are to unmarried mothers. So something about marriage and childbearing has really stayed tightly linked in the East Asian context. Limited labor force attachment of married women can mitigate some of the inequality that is associated with very differential employment trajectories and earnings trajectories of women in the United States. But this is changing in Japan. If you're kind enough to have me back in 10 years, I'll update you on this because I think this will be really different in 10 years. I'm going to skip the next one, but there are some aspects that are likely to exacerbate inequality. High divorce rates. So 25% now of all marriages in Japan end in divorce. That's not as high as the US, but most places aren't as high as the US. This is normal. This is France. This is Germany. This is most of the Western European countries are similar levels. Limited public support for families. I think that all of the work we're doing has policy relevance, again, to repeat myself, if you care about child inequality and the reproduction of disadvantage. In the context of low but rapidly growing public investment in family support. So another thing that I think is really important here is, this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's quite relevant for thinking about, for example, the implications of divorce. One of the things that we're really interested in is understanding the linkages between demographic change and well-being across the life course in societies where public support is relatively limited, and often there is either a real or sort of presumed tendency to rely on family for support. Think about older divorced men in Japan. They're divorced, no contact with their wife. Sole custody in Japan means sole custody. No contact with their children. Probably haven't remarried. Think about the implications, not for the children, but for example, divorced men or women who never marry or women who lose custody of their children and are in the same particular circumstances as men that I just described. So I think a lot of these things are really important on this last line. This emphasis on family support in the context of ultra-low fertility, high levels of non-marriage, high levels of childlessness. This is going to be a real question for the future in understanding well-being and inequality in East Asia, because it's not in Japan the highly educated who aren't marrying and aren't having children. It's the less educated. So, I'm going to skip this chat. I'm going to skip this because it's kind of what I already said. I'm going to wrap up because I think I'm over time, but I really want to have a conversation with you all about these things. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to a conversation with you. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Okay, now we have about 30 minutes for Q&A. We'll collect the questions in groups, so raise your hand and introduce yourself briefly. Any questions or comments? Oh, Da-Kun, please.
Wait till we get back to Princeton.
It's too fascinating. Yeah, I'm thinking about divergent